I'm Brian Wilson.
I'm Mark Rankin.
Welcome to In the Between.
Today's guest is Clarksdale resident Roger Stolle. For those who don't know, Brian and I have done a documentary called James Super Chicken Johnson, A Life in Blues, which is all about Clarksdale resident and Mississippi blues band James Super Chicken Johnson. When Brian and I were first setting out to do this film, Roger Stolle was our contact who put us in contact with so many fantastic blues musicians in and around the Clarksdale area. He was very instrumental in helping us secure phone numbers, emails for people like Cedric Burnside, Charlie Musselwhite, various other people that have been in our film. And in that time, Brian and I have really got to know Roger because we've been back to Mississippi enough times, and every time we go, we always have a great conversation with Roger.
Yeah, Mark, one of the things that really always so impresses me about Roger is just how well connected he is. He really is a hub of the community. And so I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about how that role unfolds and the kind of role that he plays within Clarksdale.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's been there for just over 20 years, and he's been so instrumental in revitalizing that town and looking at its blues scene and how that can be a great tourist attraction. So, without further ado, let us listen to Roger Stolle. Hey, Roger, how you doing?
Good.
First question I'm doing okay. First question I just wanted to ask you, how's the weather in Clarksdale, Mississippi?
Well, if you'd asked yesterday, I would have said completely miserable because it was suddenly cold after not being so cold and suddenly rainy after, frankly, a very dry summer. Today, as you can probably see right now as we're talking, there's sunshine in the background. So It is chilly today, mid 50s, but sunny. So I won't complain.
It's a gorgeous day.
Yeah, Roger. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you is where are you from, and because you've been in Clarksdale for over 20 years, if I'm right.
Yeah, it's pretty bonkers. I've been here almost 24 years, and I visited for about 6 out of St. Louis. I lived there for 6.5 years, but I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, sort of Dayton and vicinity. I went to school in Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati.
What was the main reason that brought you to Clarksdale? Brian and I know you are a huge blues fan, but what was it about Clarksdale 25 or almost 25 years ago that essentially brought you to where you are now?
Well, so I'll back up a little bit. So again, grew up in Dayton, Ohio, went to school in Cincinnati, went back to Dayton, stumbled into advertising, and that's what eventually took me in February 1995 to St. Louis, Missouri. But before that all happened, I became a music fan when I was 10 years old, when Elvis Presley died, 1977. And I started buying his little, 45 RPM records, the reissues of things I would hear on the radio or TV and, spoke to me. What I didn't know then that I now know, of course, there were blues covers, blues and R&B. So that's how I got in through the back door into blues music and started sort of researching on my own. And becoming, fairly obsessed with it, some might say, particularly ex-girlfriends would say that probably. So, I got into blues and was into blues when I arrived in St. Louis.
Okay.
And suddenly being in St. Louis, Missouri, you look at a map and you're like, well, hey, 5 hours, you're in Mississippi. So I came down initially to do what I called, there are heavy air quotes here, but the Dead Man Blues Tour. I thought it was all gone. You weren't reading much about it. Wasn't much coming out of the South and Mississippi so much for blues. It was mainly, Chicago, things like that. But I thought I'll come down and see where my heroes came from and or ended up. And the initial visit was exactly that. And what's funny to think about now, there was only really one blues museum in the world at that point, at least that I'm aware of, and that was the Delta Blues Museum. But it was one little tiny room upstairs in the Carnegie Public Library, not the massive former train depot museum it is today. So you had that. You had no Mississippi Blues Trail marker system, no markers whatsoever, really, celebrating that music and culture and people. And then several of the key blues figures did not yet have headstones. Or at least, if you take the case of Robert Johnson, he had a couple of headstones, but they weren't necessarily in the cemeteries where we think he is today.
Okay.
So, that first visit really was just that. It was super quiet. Downtown Clarksdale, super empty, super quiet. Seemed like you're kind of, how it is if you sort of try to run in water, like in the ocean. It was sort of like that walking around. Of course, it was hot. It's a warmer time of the year. But it was just sort of like everything was in slow motion. And, the people I ran into were super friendly. But really, nobody knew nothing about nothing when it came to, blues or what to go do. There was no marker at the so-called crossroads intersection of 61 and 49. So it's just a very different place.
Yeah, it must have been.
I talked to enough people and was able to do enough research, for lack of a better term, to want to come back and have a more in-depth search for live music. And so the next visit I made was longer, but I looked into a Sunday night at Junior Kimbrough's juke joint up in Tullahoma, Mississippi, which is like North Mississippi, what they call the Hill Country region, just outside the Mississippi Delta. And supposedly it was operating every Sunday night. That's not really true, but it operated many Sunday nights. But the night I was there, got there in the afternoon, and there was some little deal going down out front. Something, I had to wait for that to go away. But then went inside. It was so bright outside, like 4 p.m. on a sunny Sunday in Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so dark inside. I looked in, I couldn't see anything. It was just dark. And I heard a voice say that I could come in. And I went in, and my eyes adjusted. And it was Junior Kimbrough, and he was just sitting there. A couple people were shooting pool. But anyway, so there's this building out in the middle of nowhere that clearly built without the aid of an architect, eons ago. Just plain wood. Walk inside. Once your eyes adjust, there was folk art painted on all the walls, even the ceiling. And that night, Junior Kimbrough performed, his sons, grandkids, R.L. Burnside, his sons, grandkids, like the whole sort of lineage of surviving what they call hill country blues performed that night. Total local African-American audience, moonshine passed around in plastic milk jugs, like I say, folk art on the walls. So like the whole experience was exactly like going into a history book. You could walk into a history book or go join Alan Lomax back in the day on a trip. That's what it felt like. And that's what kept coming back to Mississippi. Now, for Clarksdale specifically, on my repeat visits, because that really, I could not get that night out of my mind. Because it was like, wait, culture is still living. It still has a people and a place, and you can actually go experience it. So I kept looking for that. Junior's was never actually open with live music again when I visited. And eventually, a year or two later, he died, and a year or two later, it burned down. But I kept coming down to Clarksdale because of the history, really, and to go through the little Delta Blues Museum, and also Greenville, or as we say, Greenville here, Greenville, Mississippi, and Leland next door, because there were musicians I could go hang out with. Pat Thomas, who passed away this past February, James T. Model Ford, who died several years ago. But you could go, hang out with them at home when there weren't gigs at night, which was most nights, and still get a musical experience, and in Pat's case, also a folk art experience. So that kept me, coming down to the region. But honestly, if Leland or Greenville had what I viewed as the sleeping infrastructure of the blues that Clarksdale had, it had the people, places, and things. It just didn't have active live music, and it didn't have active commerce and business downtown. But the infrastructure was, to me, just seemed perfect to bring back. If Greenville or Leland had that, who knows? I may have tried to settle there. They certainly had some musicians who became good friends, but kept coming back to Clarksdale and getting to know people here. Frank Ratliff, Rat at the Riverside Hotel, George Messenger at Messenger's Pool Hall, Red Payton at Red's Lounge, Miss Sarah Moore at Sarah's Kitchen. Sort of these usually quiet, but still kind of real blues places, and making those kinds of friends in sort of what I would call the blues world. And then other friends like Bubba O'Keefe, who was a Clarksdale businessman at the time. I ultimately bought my building from him that I turned into my Cathead Blues store. And once living here, started Juke Joint Festival with them and that kind of thing. And now he's our tourism director. But I guess it probably fell down to the people. There were enough here, and then it looked like downtown just seemed like something could be done with it.
Roger, was it the music that was attracting you to the area, or was it the people?
Is the music person. What I usually tell people, and actually people have started to use my line. I've seen it shown up in documentaries with other people speaking it, but I would always say, the blues brought me here. The people made me stay. In other words, they made me want to stay. But most of those people were tied directly to the music and or the culture behind it. And, again, I've been here almost 24 years, and the only sad thing, regretful thing, whatever, is just that, most of those initial older friends, particularly in the African American community, have now passed on. I told somebody the other day, I can't believe how many dead people are in my phone. I don't pick out numbers. I can't do it. And I'll run across them. It's like, people you don't even think about day to day.
So when you think about back to that, like that very first week that you had made this decision to go to Clarksdale, you packed everything up, you got in your car and you arrived, and there's like that first day is like, I'm here now. Like, was that moment of like, oh, I've got a whole pile of work in front of me, or is it just pure excitement, or was there like, what the hell have I done, or how is that?
The answer is yes.
Yes.
A little bit of all that, coming down, I had a van at the time and it broke down on the way, actually broke down in Memphis. That was a, logistical thing. But I had bought a house. I live downtown now where I'm sitting talking to you. But I had bought a house just across the Sunflower River. And so, fixer-upper from the 1920s, that kind of thing. So there's just a lot to be done. I had this new store space. I'd purchased this building downtown. But the excitement kind of overrode everything. Also, I was coming out of a life, a short life, whatever you want to say, in advertising. So at least I had some cash on hand. So, I could build things, fix things, do things. So that was not an immediate concern, which helps a lot. When you're trying to start a new business and, move into a new house and all these kind of things. It was smiles every morning, waking up thinking, I'm in Clarksdale. Can you believe I'm in Clarksdale? I'm within miles of Stovall, where Muddy Waters grew up. And, basically my store is half a block from 2nd Street, which Muddy Waters referenced later in one of his songs he recorded in Chicago, talking about here. So things like that just, it just meant a lot. To be able to pick up the phone and call, T-Model Ford, or I'll rarely talk to Miss Stella, who became ultimately his 6th wife. But to call and talk to her and say, hey, you guys in the house today, I'll come down and visit, that kind of stuff.
I mean, there's such a paradox here. And the fact is, in the state of Mississippi, where the population seems to be somewhat decreasing every year. People are leaving the state, but folks like yourself, so excited to be there, bringing ideas, bringing all this, initiative. Would you say, then, the big question, I guess, in the last 24 years, have you seen, I guess, economically, has there been an improvement in the area, the state, from what you've seen?
So there's a couple ways I'll attack that question. First off, population decline. Speaking for Clarksdale specifically, since I've been here, not because I'm here, I should point out, but since I've been here, I'm sure we've lost 3,000 to 4,000 residents in Clarksdale.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. However, we have picked up, I don't know, a few hundred of people who moved here either to be literally involved with downtown revitalization or blues music or the visual arts, things like that, or because of that. Like it made them come here once for a festival, for example, Juke Joint Festival maybe, and then keep coming back and then, well, let's buy a house or let's, many have moved here. We also have even more who own property here, but only visit, a few times a year or spend chunks of their year here. So, while we have lost a lot of residents, many of them were dissatisfied with the modern, quiet, small town. And so they weren't contributing to the positive things or any kind of revitalization efforts or the music. For the folks who have moved and or invested here, they're all about doing something. Even if they're just showing up at shows and eating at restaurants, that helps us.
Of course.
But many are indeed musicians or club owners or artists. Some have just retired here and go out and kind of support from that direction. So that's been super helpful. Without all of that, I'll admit when I moved here, it was a lonely thing in terms of being somebody who had moved here. There were a couple people who had moved here in the past, like John Ruskey, for example, but nobody in that, time frame, 2002. But within 2 years, you started to have like Stan Street, who ultimately had Hambone, which was a music venue. You had the Cravaros move in here, who opened Bluesberry Cafe. Because of, mostly, in fact, because of folks who have moved and or invested here, we now have well over a dozen annual festivals. This year, we will have had, by year's end, basically 20 what I would call festival type events.
Amazing.
Some are very small and many are not successful yet, but most of that was not locals on their own saying, hey, I think I'll start a festival, because, financially it doesn't necessarily make sense so much unless you really have a good organization behind you. But if you're into it, passionately, or you own a business you're going to do the festival in or in front of or something, it starts to really make sense. So it's the sort of inside out, the creatives and entrepreneurs and artists and musicians who are local, those who come from the culture and from the town. And then there are those who moved here and or invested. And most of those folks, I usually say, when I moved here, we had more characters per capita than anywhere else I'd really visited. And I think we do today as well, because many of those folks who moved here are also characters, they're going to add the local flavor. Not me. I'm totally normal. But yeah.
But so this is, you've basically gone, like in Clarksdale, from not having live music very many nights of the week to 12 months of festivals and music pretty much every night of the week. And it's not just the immediate music festivals, like there's the other pieces going on now with the art festivals and the mural festivals. And there's a whole pile of stuff that's happened. Yeah, film festival.
Well, and it all comes back to quote unquote blues. At one point, that first, I want to say the first or second week I was here, I went to a meeting at City Hall with the then mayor and board of commissioners. And at the end of the meeting, you used to be able to just raise your hand and ask a question or make a public statement. They learned their lesson eventually about letting people just do that without knowing what they're going to say. So you have to pre-register now. But an old dude, and I'll just say it was an old white guy, stood up and just said, blues, blues, blues. I'm tired of hearing about blues. Blues ain't going to save our town. And I kept my mouth shut because, I am kind of smart. I was like, well, I'm not getting involved with that. But I went back and thought about it. And, from his perspective, that was absolutely true. Like, he couldn't visualize how that would possibly help us because it's not a Nissan plant or whatever. For me, I viewed it, and this is how I started describing it. We had this empty table. This table that, used to have these things that had gone away, restaurants and entertainment and theaters and businesses and that kind of thing, some population. And so it's this empty table. We put blues in the middle, but it's a puzzle piece. It's not an island. It's not an island, floating out there in a sea, so to speak. It's a puzzle piece you build upon. So basically, you've got blues. You make it reliable. You start to market it. Well, now people need more places to stay. So an entrepreneur says, hey, I'll build a hotel room. Then more people start staying, and an entrepreneur says, hey, we need more restaurants. I'll open a restaurant. And that's exactly what has happened. And that's how we envisioned sort of downtown revitalization rolling out. And I
think it's a great idea.
And now we're getting to puzzle pieces that are farther out. Like, since it sort of became a thing, and frankly, it was a thing when I lived in St. Louis. So I guess I knew about it when I came here. But the idea of microbreweries, brew pub type microbreweries. For years, we talked about that here, the need for it. Now we have one, Red Panther Brewing Company, named after
great beer.
The Red Panthers that used to be here. They're extinct now, I guess. But our Coahoma County that I'm sitting in, Coahoma County, is a Choctaw word that means Red Panther. So it's kind of cool.
Oh, I didn't know that.
We have that. For years, and this is still ongoing, we've said that we need a real RV park, a real year-round camping situation. We now have a couple that has bought the land, gotten the permissions. Unfortunately, their business took big hits during COVID down in Florida, I think is where they were. So I'm not sure the status at this moment, but hopefully that's going to happen. That's a puzzle piece that's missing. And each of these pieces, once you add it, other things start getting added to it.
Mm-hmm.
This Red Panther Brewing Company, for example, there's Saturday night, there's like a country music performer who's going to do a thing in the courtyard there. Now, I'm not in modern country, which is not actually country. That's not my bag, but it's positive. It's like something that's a puzzle piece that was missing. There are locals who will want to go see that. So we just start to pick up things like that. Also, because of the music and art scene, you get, for example, retirees, for lack of a better description, who come here and they bring their life skills. They were an educator their whole lives. Well, now they brought those skills here. They're going to go say to one of the nonprofits or one of the schools, hey, can I help? There's one guy who moved here who did a lot of the more technical, researchy type things for a major police department. So now he's here if anybody wants to sort of use him as a resource. So you start to pick up those kind of things that without that first puzzle piece of the blues just would not have happened. I mean, I truly believe that. Again,
I think you're
the
right.
festivals,
Yeah.
Most of the festivals are music. Almost all the music is going to be blues. But we are getting to where there's more roots, Americana type things, a little bit of country. Rock music's always at the fringe of blues anyway. Of course, we had the Tennessee Williams Literary Festival. That was already going on. But this year, I worked the whole weekend at my store, but talking with people, and these are people who come every year for it, and some new people. Everybody seemed to agree it was the best presentation ever, like the strongest. So it's actually growing.
Fantastic.
And, some of those folks are blues people, and then many are not. And that's great.
Yeah.
So it's those kind of things. I want us to get a food festival. That's what we need.
Food was a great idea. It's so interesting what you're saying, because when Brian and I were sort of filming the Super Chicken film and going all over the state, and Clarksdale certainly seems to be one of the, if not the most successful sort of smaller, not towns, but small, successful towns compared to what else we saw in Mississippi. I mean, Jackson's something totally different. Oxford's obviously, the university town. So apart from places like Vicksburg or Oxford, which already had something going on anyway, an original, a university town or something historic. But there were so many places that we would pass through that seemed to be almost derelict or almost dead. And Brian and I always kind of came back to that conversation of saying, like, yeah, there is a criticism that we would hear from some people saying, well, as you said, people saying, oh, it's all just blues, that's all. But what you guys have done in 25 years by marketing blues, it's created such a great sustainable economy for so many people. It's brought in jobs, it's done so much. I guess the only sort of other part to discuss in that is sort of how can that work for some of the other towns in Mississippi that seem to be dying on the vine? They really are. Because what you've done in Clarksdale works incredibly for Clarksdale, but you can't sort of then say, well, we're going to do it over in this town here and do it that town there, or make this a jazz town or make this a rockabilly town. Just seeing other parts of Mississippi that seem to be still really not doing so well. Do you see anything there, Roger, that, how you could turn around those sort of places?
Hang on 1 second. My dog is speaking to me.
Of course. I could give you an answer in that very long-winded question.
Pets always come first, as they should.
Let's give her a treat. All right. But to get back to your question, though.
Yeah. What do you think?
So what I have told other towns, I've talked about it here in town, but also in other towns, a chamber of commerce or a tourism type event, things like that, is that every town, I believe, has something you can capitalize on. Maybe multiple things, depending on the size of the town. It was blues for us. That's the foundational thing. Again, as we've discussed, it doesn't have to be the only thing, and hopefully it leads to other things. Mm-hmm. But you still got to dance with the one that brung you, which is what I always have to remind people. We now have live blues music in Clarksdale, Mississippi, 365 nights a year. And if you are a venue that's handling one of the nights where there's only one musical experience going on, it has to be blues. As long as we have at least one, then bring it on, bring other musics in. That's great. But every town has something. Probably it's not blues. In Mississippi, some of the towns could try to do it. Here, when we really started working on it, we fortunately had a couple venues that were still operating, even if they weren't doing a lot of blues or a lot of music. And we still had many of the traditional bluesmen and women in the area. And some towns just don't have. I mean, you look at Greenville, Mississippi, used to have all kinds of musicians. They just only had one kind of functioning venue you could go to towards the end there. But now pretty much all their musicians are gone, at least. There's not enough to really sustain something without bringing people in from other towns, and that's extra expense and whatever. But there's always something that can be capitalized on. Leland, Mississippi, of course, for example, Jim Henson, the Muppet creator, is from there.
Oh, and, right.
Mm-hmm. To me, it's completely bonkers. There isn't a major named Jim Henson Muppet Festival, whatever.
Yeah.
And do what it takes to license things properly or bring in the family, whatever it takes to make it happen. I think those have been the reasons why they haven't done it in the past. But to me, that's global. I mean, who doesn't like the Muppets,
Yeah, so true.
this is such an important point because it seems like a lot of the times that people forget that if the art form is not going to be just a museum piece, then you have to sort of consider that puzzle as you talk about. Like, if you've got people who are doing the art, like in the case of Clarksdale playing the blues, they also have to eat. They got to buy their groceries. They have vehicles that need to be repaired. They've got friends who come and visit. And so if people always see it as like this backwards looking, like we're just going to present, like the one museum, doesn't really capture what is required. So if, as you say, if you can identify whatever that one piece is and then figure out what those other pieces are, that just seems like, like the missing piece. And I think back, to your place, Cathead. Everybody who goes to Clarksdale ends up in your shop at one point, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just because you've got it. Yeah, but it's not just because you've got a great selection of memorabilia from Clarksdale. It's because you have event listings, you've got your newsletter, you meet the characters, and it's centrally located. Like, how do you put that together? Like, how did you get Cadet to be that place?
So, I moved to Clarksdale not to open a store, even though that's the first thing I did. I moved to Clarksdale with a mission, and that mission was and still is to help organize and promote the blues from within. The store was sort of my platform to work from, and it sort of served a couple purposes. One, it's the store I always wanted to walk into but could never find. So if you're into what I'm into, then it's going to be the ultimate store for you. But two, I needed something that would bring people in as a magnet. Get them to come in so you can talk to them. So back then, I would show them a chalkboard. If there was music, I had music on the chalkboard. Now it's a flyer that has so much on it week to week that, people have to get out their reading glasses to try to read it.
Yep.
But then I can hand them a map and I can do recommendations. Because the idea is, okay, if you can turn a 1 hour visit to Clarksdale or any town into an overnight, that's where the magic happens on two fronts. One is that's where the financial exchange with the town happens, because now I got to book a hotel room. Now I'm going to eat some meals here. Now I'm going to go out for entertainment. Now I may go, shop some retail, whatever, pump gas into the car so I can drive back to the airport, whatever. But also, if people in a town like Clarksdale, not necessarily everywhere in the world, but here, people are so friendly. There are so many characters. And of course, there's all the music and art. If people spend the night here and go out to a Red's Lounge or a Hambone or whatever, you're going to walk away with not just like, I went to a place and had a good hamburger, or I went to a place and heard some good music. You're going to walk away with an experience and probably walk away with some friends. It really is that kind of a place. And we have to get people to spend the night for them to have that experience. My favorite thing is when we turn a 1 or 2 hour visitor into an overnight. My second favorite is when they can't do it because they have a room booked in Vicksburg or Memphis or somewhere, but they regret it because they see the list. Because I'm like, well, those people are coming back. I'm sorry for today that you regret it, that you didn't, book a room here, but they're coming back from the way they're talking.
So what's still missing? Like you mentioned, you're missing a food festival. What else is missing? And like, what are you working on these days that you're pretty excited about in terms of putting more of those puzzle pieces into place?
Well, first off, with the food festival concept, the example I would give of a successful one here in the Delta is in Greenville. Because Greenville doesn't really, their blues festival, frankly, is more rhythm and blues at this point. It's not really a tourist event like it used to be, but they now hold the Mississippi Delta Hot Tamale Festival. And hot tamales, the ones in this region of the U.S., of the world, are different than everywhere else. And, that's just a really great driver of both locals who want to come in and regionals who know what a tamale is, a Delta tamale, as well as tourists who are foodies. So, it's an example of, again, maybe they're not, standing on the blues like they used to bring in business to their town, but they found another outlet for that, another way to attract people. As far as other things that we are missing or need or hope to do here in Clarksdale, one of the big misses I see, and this isn't something I personally want to do, but there are people who do it. So somebody surely at some point will do it. We have a lack of ground transportation for visitors. Yeah. I can put together, if people contact me, I can get them rides to and from the airport, to and from a train station, maybe a one-off trip to something here in town. What we need is somebody, a setup where people are like, well, I'm going to go to Ground Zero Blues Club tonight, have some drinks. I need to get back to the Shack Up Inn. Without going through a whole bunch of different people and trying to figure it out, just a way to say, okay, Uber, Lyft, a cab, whatever, but to have more available, reliable ground transportation. Particularly, I'm thinking about for the visitors and the tourists, folks who come from Europe and don't want to drive, that kind of thing. And then, of course, drinking and driving, we always try to cut back on. For Juke Joint Festival, that's the only one of our festivals we can do it financially. But we typically run shuttle buses between all the venues and the hotels on that Saturday night to make it convenient for folks and also cut down on drinking and driving.
Yeah. Here's a question. When you first came to Clarksdale and you were essentially working within the African American community, because that's predominantly where the musicians are African American, was there trust there for you? When you first started working with, and over the 25, almost quarter century of you working with so many different blues musicians, would you say that trust has increased, or is there, not just with yourself, Roger, but just within the community, have you seen a difference or a change in how those two, white community, black community, how those two communities have interacted over the years? Has it improved? Has it changed? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I'd say early on, I was mainly working with older African American male musicians, because there really weren't that many women here actively performing or wanting to tour or anything like that. In that case, I think because I've always gravitated towards older people. Older generations have just always gotten along better with older people maybe than younger people. I don't know. I don't have kids or anything, so maybe that's part of it. So there was that. And also, as I would never say to somebody, but I think became apparent, I wasn't into it for the money. It's my whole thing is, well, I got to make a living to sustain my lifestyle. But if somebody's going to lose, it's not going to be me. So like when I would take Big George Brock overseas, we did a 2-week tour in the UK. That lost money because a promoter basically didn't pony up like she was supposed to. Well, I took that hit. I didn't make a big deal about it with George, but my thing was, well, I'm not going to have a sleepless night knowing that, I don't know, I made a deal and he suffered for it. So I think musicians did trust me based on once I built a track record. But I also think in the beginning, there was just so little happening anywhere around here. I mean, it was just so dead that anything seemed like a positive. And, folks were much more willing to, take a chance on the adventure to see if it panned out. Also, and this is my policy till today and will be tomorrow, is that if it's something that involves a blues musician's talents, culture, history, musicianship, if they need to be paid something is how I feel about it. They on their own want to go do something, that's fine. I mean, if they want to set up in front of the store and play for tips, well, that's great, and I'll promote it for you. But my thing is, it's sort of like when I do panel discussions normally at King Biscuit Blues Festival. This year we took a year off, but and other places I guess I've done it. I make sure we have some kind of stipend based on whatever the budget is and the economy of that event. Some things pay $50, take it or leave it. It's something. Other things might pay $250. Whatever for that type of a thing. And of course, real gigs and tours. That's even more. My thing is to just be real upfront about it, everything that I can, everything I know about it. And basically, I don't say take it or leave it, but it's that kind of thing. It's like, it's your decision, musician X. And, if they come back later and say, well, I really think I should be getting, I had a big name musician who lives in Mississippi, not in Clarksdale, who went back on a deal one time. He ultimately fulfilled the deal, but I was helping somebody book a casino show. And, I thought it paid very well. So the guy who was asking me to book it for him, and I was doing it for free as a favor to him because I liked what he was doing with his nonprofit separately. And so I called, made the deal, made the offer, he accepted it. It was all cool. And a couple weeks later, this artist called me back and said, last time I played a casino up there, it paid, such and such, and started to get into it. I'm like, this was the budget. This was the offer. You said yes,
Yeah.
And we probably had a paper contract too. But anyway, but that's really rare. In most cases, musicians that I've worked with either said yes or no. And if they said yes, they were appreciative of the gig and the experience. And they knew if I was involved, that it was going to be as legit as it could be, or I would deal with what the problems were. And I know, some, I'm not a promoter per se, I guess, because I don't do just that for a living, and oftentimes do that just as a side thing to help people out. But some sort of amateur promoters I know who've done things around here, they're all about it till it sort of falls apart. And then it's sort of like, they don't answer their phone anymore kind of thing. But I'd say generally speaking, the older generation of Mississippi blues performers that I dealt with, there was great trust both ways. I think it was rewarding both ways. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Sometimes for me, it wasn't financial. It was the experience. Getting a tour overseas with a Bilbo Walker. I mean, come on, that's crazy. That's like going to the moon or something. Totally worth it, regardless of what it cost or didn't cost. Some of the younger acts are more of a challenge. And frankly, I hate to generalize like this, but I'd say generally speaking, it's the younger acts who have given me the most problems when I've tried to book things or take people places or at least get them places.
Why is that? Is it their expectation is higher, or the value system is a bit different? What's the reason?
So I'm going to sound like an old man now. I feel like it's really that the generation that I'm sort of talking about. It's just they're less entrepreneurial and business oriented, which is funny because by and large they're far more literate and educated, in an academic sense.
Yeah.
And some of the old dinosaurs that I worked with, T. Model Ford and guys like that, they couldn't read or write, but they actually had a pretty decent business sense about them. Yeah. Okay, maybe T. Model's a crazy example to use, but like Big George Brock couldn't read or write, and he owned multiple businesses throughout his lifetime. He just navigated, and figured it out, even if he didn't, he couldn't read the contract or the deed or the whatever. But he really was about trying. He would try things. He was entrepreneurial. He would, even against my advice sometimes, would do things like buying a really worn out tour bus that, guess what? The motor blew up and, it ended up costing him a whole bunch of money. But he was still, even late in years, like, well, there's a chance I can make you even a little more money. I'm going to take it. And I guess that was just more of that generation, some of the almost Depression era, World War II era, people that came through some of those, sharecropping era, which is its own disaster, came through that. Compared to those experiences, this was, I won't say easy money, but an easier experience,
Maybe that's what it is. It's just,
That's kind of one of the paradoxes, though, isn't it? If you build something successful, people looking in later on, they kind of just, they start to assume that there must be like millions of dollars floating around, and all you have to do is just ask for it. And it's easy to forget how much of the work continues to go on behind the scenes. Like you mentioned, doing it for free because you like someone's project, or, making sure you backstop whatever agreement was made. But if you're on the outside looking in, all you see is a successful event or a successful transformation. So it's got to be a paradox at some point.
So there are a couple things. So the creator of Saturday Night Live once said, if you make things look easy, people think it's easy. Yeah. And that's what it is. We'll do events that are successful that, we put all kinds of effort into it, maybe even made a little mini business plan or created a nonprofit to do it. And people see it and they're like, well, that was easy. I could go do that. So you have that mindset. And then you have the other mindset of, they kind of look, at the situation and think, oh, yeah, well, he's the one making the money. I live by pretty frugal means. I'm a big coupon clipper and all those kind of things, but I like fast cars. So I have a nice car, and I know some of the musicians look at that. And they're like, And it's like, well,
he's making all the money.
I've got 7 years of payments, dude. I got good credit,
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
But it is funny. People make assumptions. And I would say more younger people, and I hate to generalize again like that, but it seems like that's what I've run into, then the older generations will make assumptions like that.
Sure. You talk about entrepreneurial, you talk about Super Chicken a little bit here. Just his, when we first brought him to Vancouver to do shows, the entrepreneurial spirit there was the fact that he brought his own guitars. And I didn't know he did this when he first came. He had this, 3 or 4 guitars that he wanted to sell here at the shows. Yeah. And I thought, what a wonderful idea. And I don't know if he did, but still, it's the idea that you can, not only you performing in a show,
Well, and you have to say to your listeners that these are homemade folk art guitars. These aren't just guitars. So, these are one-of-a-kind Super Chicken, and they play. There's nothing like them on earth, made out of found objects many times. Yeah. So, it's incredible. He'll bring those to the shows, play them, and basically be like, well, I love this guitar, but, you pay me X and you can have it, and he'll try to sell them.
Most of the time,
one thing to take home.
Exactly. And most of the people who buy those guitars are not guitar players. They're just people who like to see something in their home which looks as good as it does. I mean, it's a great, as you said, a great piece of folk art. It looks great on the wall. And yeah, he didn't get into that, I think, because he had this burning desire to make guitars. It was just that entrepreneurial sort of spirit of going, what else can I do here? What else can I? And it's great as he sets up. He's got these guitars displayed around the stage. It adds so much more to the image and the sort of mystique of the performer in that sense.
It's basically his brand. Super Chicken. It's like this brand. There's nobody else just like Super Chicken. He writes quirky songs, or just a little bit different than the way most folks write a song.
Yep.
He plays, amazing guitar, but it's got its own little quirks to it as well. The slide guitar. He builds these homemade guitars. Sometimes he just does paintings. Of course, he has trouble telling a story straight. You're really into it, and then you realize, oh, there's a punchline.
This is maybe not a true story.
Yeah, but all the way around, he's going to entertain you, and try to, make a little, pull a little bit extra out of your wallet if you can.
Yeah, exactly. That's very true. But even, what, doing those shows with him, he never even wanted a contract. That was the weirdest thing. Even when I first brought him to Vancouver, and he didn't know who I was, apart from being a very good friend of somebody else who had brought him to Toronto. He just trusted that and said, I'll send you over a contract. Oh, no, it's fine. I'm like, oh my God, you're going to come all the way to Vancouver without a contract. That's incredible.
It's interesting with many of the older blues performers. Frankly, if you did, like I would feel with overseas tours, things like that, especially, or shows,
you need those contracts.
You got to have paperwork.
Yeah.
They didn't even want a copy of it. Well, in fact,
no.
The only ones who ever I offered it, because I always offer a copy, was Robert Wolfman Belfour. And,
wow. What a wonderful musician.
Fortunately, one of the trips I had him on, he had taken his copy, because basically we're in Norway at Newtown Festival.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
where we were.
Supposed to, he, T Model Ford, L.C. Omer, and Mr. Belfour were each supposed to play 3 shows, one after the other on a package. And they had done 2, and that next morning he was telling my buddy Jeff, oh yeah, I'm not playing a third. My contract says 2 shows. Well, I did the contract, so I knew he didn't say that, but I didn't have mine with me at that exact moment. So I said, well, let me go back to my hotel room and get the contract. He's like, oh no, I have it right here. He whips it out. So I opened it up and I said, I'm trying to be gentle with it, and I'm like, well,
that's a
right,
3.
Number 3. And basically he wouldn't admit he was wrong, but he said he would do it as a favor to us.
Oh, that was nice of him.
I'll take it.
Yeah, sure. As long as you do the show, it doesn't matter.
But it's funny. Most musicians didn't even want a copy of it because T Model couldn't read it. He just trusted you, And I'm sure if I'd hosed him on a deal or something, then maybe he wouldn't have picked up the phone the next time. I don't know.
Yeah. So let's talking about that. So I mean, you've built up this amazing trust from the very, very beginning within that community. Something that we did notice. I mean, your film festival, which was amazing. You had our film in it, which is great. All the festivals that you do are so, they're well attended. They're so great as far as content goes. The only thing that we would notice, and this is anywhere in Mississippi, when we toured our film, the audience was 90% white or 95% white. And we were touring a film about an African-American musician in predominantly African-American neighborhoods. But we still had a very hard time getting African-American people to come out to what we were doing. We noticed some of the stuff going on in Clarksdale, somewhat similar. And I still, for the life of me, don't know why, because the product's great. The advertising is great. Everything there is everything that should be there is there. But there's a certain community that doesn't seem to quite engage with what's happening in that sort of sense. Any thoughts on that? Of why, or do you see that improving over the last 25 years that you've been doing this?
So there's all kinds of angles to it and ideas. But basically, blues music, as we mentioned earlier, it's a black art form. It's the voice of a culture. It's the voice of African-American culture. Mm-hmm. And in this case, specifically from the Mississippi Delta. And while there were lots of positives in that culture, there was also a whole lot of just horrible BS that culture had to deal with.
Totally.
And inequities and injustices that some of which continue to this day, at least in political ways.
Oh, yeah, I think so.
So for many, not even that young of generations at this point, but we'll say younger generations of African Americans here in Mississippi, for example, it's an archaic art form, and it's comes from very bad times.
Okay.
And some folks, and this happens sometimes to white folks too, don't get me wrong, but you'll hear things like, well, that's just a sad music. And it's like, well, yeah, some of it is sad, but really what it's trying to do is bring you back up. It's laughing to keep man and those kind of things. But then there's also, it's a wide genre. As you know, it goes from, blues rock all the way over here to, Southern soul blues all the way over there. And you got Delta blues somewhere in the middle and Chicago blues, whatever, hill country. There's something for anybody who likes music, is what I would say. One aspect of that I think it is this archaic music that came out of very hard times for African Americans. But the other aspect of it is those of us who are blues fans worldwide, most of us look like us, it's for whatever reason, that's who connected with it. We'll say starting primarily in the 1960s. But I think because of that, it may, I don't know how to put it, look funny, whatever you want to say, to a local black person here in Clarksdale, Mississippi, who doesn't know me from Adam, to see, there's another event put on by white people about our music, that kind of thing.
Sure.
And the reason I say that is the one successful foray in modern times that I have seen on the big screen concerning blues and a movie that actually garnered great comments and attendance from African Americans is the Sinners film.
Sure. Yeah.
Sinners,
huge.
Everybody doesn't know, of course, was not filmed in Clarksdale, but it is set in Clarksdale, 1930.
Set in Clarksdale.
And in our case here, Warner Brothers brought it, essentially set up an IMAX in our auditorium.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
6 screenings over 3 days for free, and most of the attendants were African American.
Yes, saw that on social media. Yeah.
However, if you went to, Reds one of those nights, most of the people there looked like me, which is to say, I'm African American. So it's a quandary. My hope is that something like Sinners, things that can cross sort of borderlines, whatever you want to say, borders, mash things up, maybe can help bring some folks into it to at least look and listen and visit and see for themselves if it's something they can relate to still, or if it's just something stuck in the past.
Yeah.
On the other end of the spectrum, we were talking about this off mic earlier. There's Morgan Freeman's Symphonic Blues Experience currently touring the U.S. And essentially, it's Clarksdale and Delta blues musicians performing kind of in front of a symphony, different symphonies around big cities in the U.S., probably overseas next year. And, it's another opportunity to sort of expose other audiences to this music and to the place that we call Clarksdale in Mississippi. Obviously, that's going to be less African American. I say obviously. I mean, I'm just saying that. What do I know? In terms of symphony orchestras around the U.S., I guess I sort of have the stereotype of, sort of wealthy white folks going to symphonies.
Well,
I could well
white,
be wrong.
yeah.
I could well be wrong. Can't say that and know that. But my point being is that I think that you are correct. When you come to some of our blues events here, you're going to see an audience. And of course, again, we are marketing these things and designing these things to attract tourists and visitors, because those are the folks who put, heads in beds, feet under tables, shopping bags in hand. Something that circulates, success and finance and that kind of stuff around the town. So that is who we're targeting. But still, you don't see enough, in my view, as many as we'd like, of true local African-American music and culture fans. And we're working on that in various ways. It's a tricky thing because,
for sure.
I'll tell you this as an example. So a few years ago now, the same auditorium where Warner Brothers showed Sinners, actually, they had what they called a Christmas blues show. And I went with a friend of mine, African-American woman, and I had been to one probably the first year I moved here, and it was straight up blues. It was like regional blues acts, with bands, and it was great. But it was sort of marketed to a black audience. So that's mainly who went. People were dressed up and everything, looked like church in there.
Nice.
This time I went, folks were mainly in street clothes because people were younger, and younger folks don't dress up like their elders used to in general, I suppose. Every day is casual day in America now, I guess. But at any rate, so we're at the auditorium, and there were 6 acts, 3 of them had actual bands, like you would expect. 3 of them were just a dude who came out, jumping around on stage, singing in a mic over a backing track. It was like karaoke, basically. But they're singing apparently what their radio hits were on Southern Soul Radio. Those were the acts that went over the best. The live bands, the audience reacted less to them. So,
interesting.
I think what popular culture and media, the radio and videos and however people are getting all that now, and especially when you cross over into like hip hop and things. I mean, they're really literally are not bands in most cases. And I think that's what, the newer generations are used to seeing, versus dude up there with a guitar taking a solo. So I think there's that as well. Black music, more frankly, I would say, than white music. It has evolved more through time and evolved faster through time.
Oh, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. So, it's just like with the British invasion. That was first white Brits and Europeans catching up with a music that started in the teens or, became popular in the 20s and 30s. And then the British invasion, of course, introduced Black blues to a wide audience here in the States in the 60s and 70s, we'll say, with, the Stones and Zeppelin and bands like that. So, one could say that many in the white world of music have always been kind of followers to the next trend. But I don't know.
That's totally true.
It's a tricky thing. I think, I don't listen to my grandparents' music. Now, I don't know what my grandparents listen to, frankly, but I think that's how a lot of kids are today. You listen to whatever your friends are listening to. And if what they're hearing off however they're listening nowadays is, hip hop, for example, here in Clarksdale, way more popular than blues,
for sure. It will be the younger crowd.
So let's go kind of full circle here, Roger, and let's go back to, back when you were a kid in Dayton, Ohio. What's been your kind of, because it's so obvious that you've surrounded yourself with musicians and music, and you love the art form and you love everything that goes with it. As an individual, how have you kind of played or not played instruments over time? Like, do you find yourself sitting at home, like plucking away at a guitar or on a keyboard, or like no desire to do it professionally, but there's just that little spark that you think, oh, I'll just keep working on this, even if I have no desire to do it professionally or even in public?
Well, for a couple decades, I still own somewhere some guitars, but for a couple decades, I would, certainly mess with guitar. I've always been a writer. So, I've obviously written a couple blues books and albums, all that kind of stuff. So I would also just write songs for my own entertainment. And not even that, really, just because I had to get the words out, I guess. But honestly, it's been 10 years since I really would pick up a guitar and sit there and actually mess with it. It's just not where my creative fulfillment is right now. I guess I just have involved myself with so many projects.
Yeah.
But honestly, that's just, to really play an instrument, you got to play it. You got to be constant. And obviously if you want to be professional, then you're going to have to master it. And I forget how many tens of thousands of hours they say it takes or whatever. But I quickly realized, living here, that I'm not going to be Big A or Super Chicken or Kingfish, So it's kind of like, well, as I tell people at the store, because I get this question a lot in different forums, I'll say, I own some guitars, but I play my position. I put myself here in a particular position to organize and promote, and everything I do is somehow tied to that. And that seems, that's, if I have any skills in this world, my skills are more on that end of things and not on the, musical side.
That's what I love about it, because we all need all those parts. Not everybody can be, front person on a stage, and without those other pieces, the other pieces don't work. So, that was partly why I wanted to ask.
Well, the other thing that I think is an advantage, the way I play my role, is I do see occasionally musicians who are involved with putting on a festival, for example. And, they'll book their act as one of the acts. Now, that may be great, or it may not be great. They're always thinking themselves, or they'll interject themselves into, well, I did this event, so I can get up and play with this act, or things of that nature, sort of, in my view, overstepping bounds a little bit. So, if I book, Super Chicken on something, he doesn't have to worry about me jumping up and playing harmonica, so.
That's a really good point. Yeah. I think it's what we're so attracted to what you did in Clarksdale. There's such an altruism to you. As you said, your mission is to promote the blues. And even financially, if you have to take a hit on that, you still have been doing it all these years. And I think that's something that's to be very commended. The fact that
a brilliant plan. My accountant would not agree.
Do you have? I mean, I don't think I know the answer to this question, but do you have any regrets moving to Clarksdale and doing what you've done for these amount of years?
I do not, and in fact, I'm not a big religious person, but thank God I did it when I did it, because I got to have those unbelievable, not just moments, experiences and relationships with these sort of the last. I get a tingle talking about this. The last of those living fossils. The last of the guys who could tell you about, plowing with a mule, picking cotton, playing these juke joints, and some of the great and horrible things that happen in those juke joints. All those kind of experiences. If I had decided to wait until today, and today is my first day at Cothead, well, they're all gone. Those dozens of guys who could, and they're mainly war guys, could tell those stories or, make you laugh in a way that you just never laughed before, or play these crazy unique musics, whether it's a T-model Ford, who doesn't, didn't really know much about timing, for example, or it's P. Dell Davis, who, had to overcome, changing from right-handed to left-handed guitar and playing, a slide with a butter knife from a wheelchair.
Oh, I remember him. Yeah.
Just like, again, from another planet, really have those experiences firsthand. It's great to listen to it on a record or a CD. It's great to see a video of it. Thank you for doing the Super Chicken documentary, for example. All these kind of things will live on after we're all gone. But there is nothing like the experience of being, in that room, or, having a 6-hour layover in Switzerland and talking to an old bluesman about how he ended up with 42 kids, things like that.
Yeah. Oh, those things.
That's a lot. No, for sure. Where do you see?
I will say this. I will say this, that if I had any regret at all, I wouldn't change anything. But man, I would love to have that health insurance I had back in my corporate days.
Yeah. Everyone, I'm sure.
It's a big issue these days. Yeah.
I'm sure. Where do you see the town being in the next 25 years? I mean, you'll still be there, I'm sure. Knock on wood with your health. But what would you envision? What would you envision in the next 25 years of where the town can be?
Well, what I would like to see, we have filled out even since, when were you here last?
Last year.
Okay, January. Okay. Even since then, we have filled in more of our empty spaces downtown.
Oh, fantastic.
And even since then, more buildings have been worked on and or changed hands. But we have some buildings, as you know, that were just let go for so long that they're not easy fixes. And so they're bigger, longer term projects that require the right people to be involved. But I'd like to see more of those get developed. One way or another, I want us to end up with a movie theater.
Yeah.
My dream right now is what I would like to have, and I swear I would drop a lot of things to be able to work with it, would be something like a black box theater, if you know what I mean. Basically a multi-use building, a large multi-use building that has a theater. You can show movies, or you can do live events, or, host everything from visual arts to music to etc. Film.
Great idea.
Something like that we could use during our festivals, but then to add a whole bunch of other stuff day to day. There is, up in Memphis, for example, there's Crosstown Arts Center.
Right.
An old Sears department store building, although I think it was like offices for theaters. I'm not sure. But they've converted it into this great green room where they do like jazz and Americana and things like that music. They've got an art bar. They've got visual art things that rotate. They've got, classes. They have, in their case, they actually have people you can live there as well. Here, I just need one good space where we can do those kind of things.
That's like the Book and Blues House in Newton. It's that kind of space that really kind of anchors that music and arts community.
Yeah.
And there are examples out there. So I believe we're going to get there. I'm just not sure exactly. There are a couple of different things that may take that turn here. But I want that. I think we need that. I think it could be a really great thing for locals and for visitors. And we could have constant programming in there.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So again, fill out as many of these buildings as possible, have something like that. Like we've already talked about, more ground transportation, some kind of a camping facility, things of that nature,
Mhm.
and continue to enhance our nightly live blues music, get more daytime stuff going on, hopefully eventually, and also sort of, I don't know if we need that many more festivals per se, but to really beef up the ones we have. So there's
Sure.
longevity to them, but also, the more we can book up hotel rooms, the more hotel rooms people build, is what it comes down to. The more people
Yeah.
we can get to visit here, the more people who are going to move here eventually. So um, it's really all about those factors, I guess.
I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of seems like the perfect way to bring this all together at the end. It's like, if you haven't been, go. It's worth a trip, and it's not just because of the geography. There, it really is full of incredible musicians and people doing interesting things.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a living history in a sense, Clarksdale. I mean,
Yeah,
Well,
there's
that's
so
the
much
thing.
still
going on.
living.
Well, that's
Yeah.
the thing. You can visit history, past
Mhm.
history. Delta Blues Museum. We have more blues trail markers than any other county. We have all kinds of historic things. But then you have the living history. You have the history of still being made and juke joints like Red Lounge and, musicians walking around like Super Chicken who are just, ridiculous artifacts, really. So you
Ridiculous
have all of
artifacts.
that. These are just characters. You can't make these
Yeah.
people up.
No, that's very true.
And,
Yeah.
but the time to experience it is now. The longer people wait, the less there is of the old school. Now there's
Yeah.
plenty of new school and ongoing school and whatever. But the thing for people to do is do a little bit of research before you come. You don't do a lot. The biggest festival we do is Juke Joint Festival. Maybe you want to come to a smaller one like Hambo. Do that kind of research, and then nothing against our chain hotels. We love Hampton Inn, Quality Inn, all that. But we have some really interesting places for all
You got-
budgets, from an award-winning
Yes.
hospital up to luxury lofts or the Travelers Hotel or Shack Up Inn. So I think that enhances the experience. So I invite
Very
you
much
to check
so.
that out. Go to visitclarksdale.com for the best lodging list. You go to cathead.biz, my website, for the best music calendar. And then come see us. Spend a couple nights.
Yeah. Excellent. Roger, thank you so much. We appreciate this so much. I mean, you
Yeah.
you helped us a lot, from the very beginning when we were actually first planning the documentary. You gave me this incredible list of names of people we could check out. And then just being able to sort of premiere our film at your festival back in 2024. 2024? Yeah, it was
I guess it
amazing.
was. Yeah, I guess that's right.
Yeah, I know. It feels like a lot longer than that. It was January 2004. That was such a special time for us for the film. I mean, we had the film play at Oxford and Magnolia, and then a whole bunch of other festivals through the States and Canada. But honestly, yours was. We were so happy that yours was the first one. It was such a great experience. So thank you for everything you
thanks very
did
much.
for us.
Well, thank you, and keep me
Yeah.
posted on all your film projects, because
100%.
and all your projects in general. That of course we do have the film festival, and we're always happy to showcase things like your Super Chicken movie, because it again acts as a document forever, but also to me, I look at it as a marketing piece too, because people look at it like, well,
Sure.
I'm going to go see that guy. Well, I want to see that town, and we just need more of that.
Yeah. Excellent.
Okay.
Thank
Yes.
you, Roger. Very appreciated.
Thank you very much, Roger.
All right, thank you. Good luck.
All right.
Thanks.
Talk soon. All right, dude. Bye. Well, that was a really good conversation, eh, Brian?
Yeah, it really was. We've spent quite a bit of time with Roger, and it's always so enjoyable just to talk to him and get his perspective on things. And one of the things that really struck me about this particular conversation was when he was talking about building trust and relationship, and not only with musicians, but with everyone he deals with. Like he's working with musicians at one point, he's working with planning committees, he's working with festival organizers,
Yeah.
he's working with politicians in the surrounding towns, and central to all those conversations for him is that he's really all about building trust and personal relationships. And it's wonderful to hear about that kind of stuff. It's so great to hear.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And for the amount of people that we've met in Clarksdale and Mississippi, he still seems to be the one person who's in it for the musicians, 100%. He's a very altruistic. He's the most altruistic person I've ever met, because, there is a lot of people in Mississippi and in Clarksdale who are still seeing the town and the area as an investment in some sort of way. And I'd never, ever got the impression that was Roger's agenda. From day one, he went to Clarksdale to essentially shine a spotlight on musicians who were needing help getting their music and message out there. And I think he's achieved it in a very, very, very good way. He's not compromised at all. It's always been about the musicians for him. And I think that's why he's got so much trust in the community with the musicians. I don't know if you remember. I remember Super Chicken once telling us that sometimes he would get checks and didn't recognize where the checks were coming from. And he always took them to Roger, because he was the one guy who always had his sort of best interests at heart. And that's to me a real testament to who the guy is, and what he's done.
Yeah, and I think, we see that both in his relationships, but also just with Cathead, his shop itself. There are a lot of businesses that sell blues memorabilia, and that's all they do. They're souvenirs. But when you go to Cat Hair, whenever you go in there, it doesn't matter. You'll find somebody who is either somebody just passing through or someone who lives there. Yeah, and people are coming and going, and it's a real cultural hub. And he has the souvenirs, but that's not what you're really there for.
No, you're right. I mean, we conducted some of our interviews at his store because he has so much great folk art in there that it looked wonderful, behind Charlie Musselwhite and various other guys. It's who he is in that store really is a central point of the community. And it seems to be a place that he's the most comfortable in. Seeing him there in his own element, welcoming people all around the world who are in there to find out about where the local blues places are, what they can buy to take back to Australia, London, wherever it is that they've come from. You can tell Roger really enjoys doing that and interacting with these folks as well.
Absolutely. And he's not shy about what he chooses to have in that shop. Like, it's not just, there are CDs and DVDs and Blu-ray, all that kind of stuff, and T-shirts. But, some of the folk art in there is not just a pretty picture. Like, a lot of the work, still references the ongoing social injustice that's going on. Yeah. So even though people sometimes forget, they don't think of the blues as being sort of a modern, living, dynamic musical form. They think, oh, that's old people's music, or, that was 100 years ago. It's not. And the stuff that people were talking about 100 years ago still exists, and people are still singing about it. Yeah, how it manifests is somewhat different, but the issue hasn't necessarily gone away. And you see it in some really nicely chosen work that he chooses to put into his shop, that people they come in contact and say, oh yeah, this is not just a great singer with a great guitar. There's some real depth there.
No, for sure there is, and that's, I guess, the ongoing debate which he talked about there, is exposing younger audiences to this particular genre of music, because it's always been a bit of an issue trying to get certain younger people interested, particularly maybe younger people of Mississippi interested in the blues. So that's always going to be an ongoing, I don't want to say struggle, but certainly an effort is required to get the blues music out to not just visiting people from outside of the state, but people within the state and even within the town.
I think with Roger, I hope people really get a sense of the really interesting personal journey he's been on, going from sort of the corporate world to the blues world. He just lives in multiple social circles, and he just navigates between them pretty much with ease.
He does. And you and I were saying just before we did our outro, he really is quite the embodiment of our podcast In the Between, because he really is in between cultures in Clarksdale, and he navigates it really, really well, because I think at the end of the day he navigates it very well because that is his agenda is just a very pure one: how to help the local musicians, and always has been, and I think always will be as long as he stays there. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and I hope you enjoyed listening to Roger and it's listening to his story.
Yep, and we'll see you all next time on In the Between.